Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Runaway Train on Blu-ray. Runaway Train came out in 1985 and was directed by Konchalovsky, and it starred Jon Voight, Eric Roberts, and Rebecca De Mornay. And this particular film has not only gone down as one of the best films to come out of the 80s, but it's gone down as the best film to come out of the Cannon Group, or as some people like to describe it, it's the Citizen Kane or the crown jewel of the Cannon Group. So the Cannon Group was a production company that was masterminded by Israeli cousins Menahem Golem and Yoram Globus. And these two guys love to make movies. They just didn't seem to know how to make good ones on a regular basis, and so they produced a lot of B movies. But sometimes, though, I mean, whereas usually you'd get something like some with respect to Chuck Norris, some dumb Chuck Norris flick, or an over the top Charles Bronson revenge movie or things like that. But sometimes you'd have some good movies come through the cracks. I mean, you'd have things like, say, Break-In, Life Force, Street Smart, or depending on who you talk to, Cyborg or Cobra. But it was one movie that is universally regarded as full-on great movie that came out of the Cannon Group. It was definitely Runaway Train. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: Best Actor, Best Lead Actor for Jon Voight, Best Supporting Actor for Eric Roberts, and Best Editing for Henry Richardson. And so the fact that you have a movie that came out of the Cannon Group being nominated for any Academy Award was definitely something that made the film stand out as kind of an oddity, in a sense that even the good movies that came out of the Cannon Group were B movies. This was definitely not a B movie. But unfortunately, while the film was certainly a critical hit, if the Academy Award nominations weren't anything to go by. I mean, you had Roger Ebert giving the film 4 out of 4 stars. It was unfortunately not a box office success. It cost $9 million to make, and it only made somewhere around 7.7 or 7.8 million. So yeah, it did not do well at the box office. But over time, though, I mean, a lot of people have come away, respecting this movie. Even if people don't think it's a great movie, they at the least tend to think it's a good movie, and it's definitely one of the standout films of the 80s. Because I mean, you think a movie about a train that's out of control and some people stuck on it, it could be like, oh, this is just a cheesy disaster movie. But no, it's a very fascinating character study, along with, say, a vehicle out of control type of movie. But let's go ahead and get into it. So, Runaway Train, it starts off at a maximum security prison in Alaska, and the prisoner, a prisoner named Manny, is at this moment being released, from being welded into his cell for 3 years by the sadistic prison warden, Warden Ranken. And Ranken and Manny have this intense rivalry because Manny has busted out of the prison more than once, and he's got a reputation as a expert safecracker, as well as a violent robber. And so the fact that he's busted out of Rankin's prison more than once is something, and has become something of a hero to the other prisoners, is something that pisses Rankin off, to a point where he's, got him welded up, in a cell for 3 years. But after, a court verdict has ruled that Manny must be released, back into Gen Pop, Rankin, obliges, but he makes it clear, to Manny that, he's hoping that, he'll screw up in the yard and that he'll have an excuse to kill him. And so, Manny, I mean, he's, getting reacclimated to being, back amongst the living, so to speak, even if it's only in prison. And while he's reuniting with his brother, who's a fellow prisoner, he's assaulted, by a prisoner that Rankin had, supposedly forced, to try and kill him. And this prisoner ends up stabbing, Manny in the shoulder and in his left hand. But before, said prisoner can kill Manny, Manny's brother, steps in and murders the prisoner and gets the beating of his life from several guards. And so, Manny, he decides, okay, it's suicide, to stay here. He's going to try and escape. And so he initially asks his brother to go with him, but his brother's too badly beat up to, make it to the outside. And so instead, he ends up getting help from a young prisoner by the name of Buck, who is in prison for statutory rape charges. But Buck, like a lot of other people, kind of looks up to Manny as a hero. And so, Buck ends up, helping him escape through hiding him in the laundry basket. And the two of them get to a secluded part of the prison and are able to make their way to the sewers and escape. Albeit, afterwards, they have to, go across, they can't, escape without, crossing, say, freezing cold landscape, once they get out of the prison. And so, once they break into a maintenance shed at a train station and get some, extra clothes, they, decide to, sneak on board a train. They don't know where the trains are going, but they know that, any train is a good train because it's going to take them out of there and out of, Rankin's realm. And so they sneak on board this one train that's, coming in. But unfortunately for them, this particular train's driver ends up having a heart attack. And while the driver is able to, throw the brakes on, he dies before he can actually shut the train off. And so this train, starts picking up speed, and it gets so, to going so fast that the brake shoes, fall off, and it's out of control. And at first, Manny and Buck are none the wiser, but then once it starts, rocking and rolling and crashing through stuff, they realize that something's wrong. And so then it's not too long after that, they realize that there's someone else on a train with them, a woman named Sara, who's a locomotive hostler who, was someone who worked with the train's driver to, park the train in the station. But she had fallen asleep in one of the cars. And when she woke up, she realized that, the train was going when it wasn't supposed to be going. And two, no one was driving it. And so when she makes her way back to the cars where Manny and Buck are, I mean, she's, even further caught off guard by the situation because there's these two, criminals on the train hiding out. And so she's trying to explain the situation to them that, they're on a train that's literally out of control. But basically, Manny and Buck, at first they're thinking that she's putting them on. She's trying to, keep them from, taking her hostage or anything, something like that. But then, they realize that no, she's telling the truth. And so, the three of them, are having to kind of work together, even though there's like a lot of, interpersonal tension between the three of them, because, Buck, I mean, while he initially looked up to Manny, he starts to, see that Manny, is not exactly someone who should be idolized, and, Sara, herself, finds herself, trying to, talk to both of them and be the voice of reason as far as like how to, try and slow the train down or how to try and stop it. But she's also, having to, keep them from going at each other's throats at times, even though they both lash out at her as well. But on the other side of the things, and there's a, there where the train station's at, where where they control like where the trains go, and and what have you. The people over there are trying to find a way. Once they realize that they have an unmanned runaway train, they're trying to find a way to safely stop it or derail it. And when they're initially thinking no one's on board, they're just thinking, okay, if the train doesn't have any brakes, we just derail it. But when they realize that there are three people on board, that's when they're scrambling, trying to improvise and how to use the technology at their disposal to slow the train down or derail it entirely. Or if they are going to derail it, okay, how do we derail it to where instead of potentially killing hundreds or thousands of people if it crashes into a populated area, versus, say, derailing it in an isolated area where only 3 people will die. So you definitely see the chains of command weighing heavily on those at the train station trying to slow things down. But you also have Warden Ranken, who, once he realizes that not only have prisoners escaped from his facility, but one of those prisoners was Manny, and these prisoners are the ones that are in fact on the train. He decides to go after the train himself by way of helicopter. So you have 3 different elements at hand. I mean, you have characters who are on the train trying to survive on it, or trying to find a way to slow it down themselves, and then you have the characters at the uh, at the train station, trying to slow it down or stop it, but being limited as to what they can do because the technology they have, it accounts for a lot of situations, but it didn't account for the driver literally having a heart attack and dying before he could shut the train down. And then of course you have Warden Ranken, who, I mean, as a figure of authority, has a lot more leeway to do what he wants to do, and is using all that to pursue one man. So but okay, so yeah, Runaway Train. This was actually a great movie. I mean, uh, on the surface, it's a prison escape movie meets vehicle out of control movie, but it's also a fascinating character study with all 3 different sets of characters, especially the 3 main ones. But I liked how it had it to where these hardened prisoners. I mean, they literally escaped from a maximum security prison, only to inadvertently wind up in another prison entirely, albeit one that's on wheels, but that is that they have no control over. So, so I like the irony of that. How both Manny and Buck, while they were prisoners at the maximum security prison, they at least knew what to do and how to do it there. Like, they knew how to survive there. Whereas with this train, though, neither of them are experts in locomotives, and so they don't know what to do. And on the other hand, with the character of Sara, I mean, I liked how she's the one who had more knowledge about the trains, but because of the fact her knowledge was limited, she could only do so much. Plus the fact that she wasn't exactly trained for the situation as exact as it was. But anyway, though, John Voight and Eric Roberts and Rebecca De Mornay, I thought all 3 of them did a great job in the movie. I think that John Voight definitely earned his Oscar nomination in this movie, for Best Lead Actor, because he does such a good job of playing a guy who's kind of like a wild caged animal, with some moments of calm, but that caged animal is just such part of his nature that he's never, like, while he has brief moments of vulnerability, he's just been pursued for so long that he's always on edge. And so even when he's with someone who looks up to him or is genuinely trying to help him, he lashes out at them. But there's this moment, though, where for me, it sort of earned him his nomination for sure. And it's this monologue he has where he's talking to Buck about basically what post prison life is like for a convict. And he's trying to explain to Buck that, I mean, yeah, you've got all these dreams about going to Vegas and all this shit, but realistically you're gonna get some menial job where you're working something dirty and or something dumb, and you're gonna have to put up with a lot of harsh treatment by those above you. But if you can do that, though, if you can get through it and you collect your paycheck and just hold on to it, be smart about it, you got a fighting chance. And okay, obviously John Voight said it much better than I did, but that's kind of the gist of what he's saying. but it's in a much harsher manner. And it's one of those life lessons that, even though it's coming from a hardened criminal character, I mean, it's something that holds a lot of weight in, reality as we know it today. And, times are tougher, unfortunately, than they were back then, arguably, financially and economically. But at the same time, I mean, it is a lesson that I think a lot of us could stand to learn. And Jon Voight, I mean, just does a wonderful job in the part. Some people call it the little bitty spot speech, because, like, you gotta clean that spot, So yeah, Jon Voight, I mean, to me, this was definitely a career best for him. And to be fair, I do still need to see the movie Coming Home. I've seen parts of it, so I know that he does great in that movie, but I still need to see the whole thing. But as far as movies I've seen in their entirety with him in it, this is definitely his best work. So as far as Eric Roberts also, turns in a great performance. But with respect to him, I think that, instead of being nominated for this movie, I think he should have been nominated for his work in the film Star 80. That's, a different, movie where it's like it was about the death of a real life. It was about the murder of a Playboy playmate, and Margot Hemingway played, the woman who was murdered, I believe. But Eric Roberts played, her, the guy who discovered her and, sort of turned her on to, the life of a Playboy, playmate. And then when he realized he couldn't have her anymore, he snapped and murdered her. But Eric Roberts did a wonderful job in that particular movie, but he was pretty scary in it, though, because it's like he was someone who, while he did something vile and he was a vile individual, there were some, moments of humanity that his character had that made him, at times, kind of sympathetic, in a sense that you could see this, train wreck coming from a mile away, so to speak. But at the same time, just on a human level, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, you feel something. But then when he does, the unspeakable in that movie, it's like he goes from being pitiable to terrifying, So it's like, I think he should have gotten a nomination for that movie. And some people actually think that his nomination in this movie, as for the character of Buck, was kind of like a consolation prize. And so while I don't think, his part in this movie was as nuanced as his work in Star 80, I do think Eric Roberts did a good job. And so while I think that Jon Voight's nomination was definitely earned, I do think that Eric Roberts' part in this movie had more of an arc than Jon Voight's did, because Jon Voight as Manny, like in his character, was basically he considers himself a dead man walking. He's gonna take this train and ride it out no matter where it goes, so to speak. Whereas Buck is someone that initially has some naivety and some hope. I mean he's naive because he's dim-witted and everything, but he has some hope and idealism, or as much as someone like him can have as a prisoner. But then when he sees that Manny is not someone who should be idolized and isn't exactly a good role model, and when he sees that Manny ultimately doesn't care about him or Sara, that's when he starts to put two and two together. That's when you see the gears turning, and that's where I think Eric Roberts really goes in as far as showing his character change and grow. And so when he starts to sort of call Manny out on his bullshit and sort of try and fight back, I mean, yeah, Manny's the wild animal, and is definitely the one who is basically stealing the show from a theatrical perspective. But at the same time, when Buck gets to a point where he's developed a backbone and trying to stand up to Manny, I think that's where Eric Roberts his performance was definitely firing on all cylinders, at least in my opinion, just because it goes from point A to point B to point C. and it's a good arc. So I definitely think that, while John Voight's performance was better than Eric Roberts in this movie, I think that Eric Roberts, his character's arc was better than Manny's in this movie, at least in my opinion. So as far as Rebecca De Mornay, I thought that she did a good job in the movie too, and there's a lot of stories as to the fact that when she showed up on set, she was still looking like Rebecca De Mornay. Rebecca De Mornay was smoking hot. I mean, this is 1980s Rebecca De Mornay, so yeah. And so basically they tried their best to make her look just sort of humdrum, normal. And so, I mean, she still looks like Rebecca De Mornay, but sort of a, worn down Rebecca De Mornay. But she does a good job, though, as far as acting as well, because, she tries to be a voice of reason, amongst these, criminals, that she's stuck with. And, you see her, like, when she's trying to explain how things are working on the train, that she's, summoning every iota of knowledge that she has that, about, trains and how they work and everything. But you also see that her character, only knows so much, about about trains and what to do in the situation they're in. And she can only go so far as her knowledge is concerned. But I also liked how she goes, in terms of, I guess, loyalty or compassion, she kind of goes back and forth between Manny and Buck, because there'll be moments where, she tries to, help Manny, but then there'll be moments where she's taken up for Buck. And so, it's an interesting dynamic, and it's like neither three at the end of the day are going to be best friends or anything like that, but since they're stuck together, they're having to work together. But because they're such, different individuals in a nightmarish situation, you're not going to get the best from them, most likely. So I thought that, Rebecca De Mornay as Sara did a good job of kind of, playing the quote-unquote normal person, in this, nightmarish situation where the train's literally going off the rails and she's stuck with these two hardened criminals. And so, but nonetheless, though, all three actors did a good job basically, bringing some humanity to their characters and offering us, good character study. But you also have, character actor Kenneth McMillan, who plays the manager of the, I believe it was the train station, where they were trying to, control the tracks and trying to derail the train. Because Kenneth McMillan is one of those actors that I'm so used to seeing as a bad guy. I mean, David Lynch's Dune, or the Stephen King movie Cat's Eye. But here, though, he does a good job of playing a corporate executive who's not corrupt. Like, he's a guy who, I mean, yeah, he's a corporate dude, but he's trying to do the right thing, and he's trying to, de-escalate the situation as much as he can, because he knows that, there's a good chance there's going to be a loss of life either way. But you also see how his character and those that he works with, sort of grapple with the fact that, I mean, they've got this, supposedly top-notch technology that, the people who made this technology weren't able to, account for the situation that, this runaway train's currently in, So, I mean, you definitely see the, chain of command wearing heavily on Kenneth McMillan's character. And I just thought that, it was one of those performances that showed you that, Kenneth McMillan could play, both, evil people and also, good people as well. So, last but not least, we have the late, great John P. Ryan playing Warden Ranken. And one of the things I like about his character is that, I mean, he's on the side of law and order, but he's someone who, is abusing his authority to fulfill this personal vendetta against one convict. And so, the fact that, the two main characters are in fact criminals, versus, say, the antagonist who is genuinely on the side of law and order, but is acting like a criminal himself, I thought was an, interesting, contrast between the two, between say like, Manny and Rankin, and some people would say that Rankin and Warden Ranken and Manny are kind of two sides of the same coin. But John P. Ryan, though, I mean, he does such a good job of selling his characters, obsessive vendetta against Manny, to a point where it's like it's scary how much he abuses his authority. I mean, on one hand, the fact that he had Manny welded into his cell for 3 years, and then almost as soon as he's out, tries to have him killed. I mean, that's pretty scary right there. And John P. Ryan, he's always done a good job of playing villainous type of characters, such as, say, in Avenging Force or Class in 1999. I mean, say what about the movies, but he was good as a bad guy in those movies. So here, he does a good job of playing a bad guy who's on the side of law and order, who's nonetheless abusing his authority. But there is something twistedly, admirable about the way that, or at the very least, you gotta, respect the guy on some level, because, the fact that he's got such determination to basically hunt Manny to the ends of the earth, or no matter where this runaway train takes him. So it's definitely a Captain Ahab, versus Moby Dick dynamic, that, kind of at play here. But then again, a lot of people would say that, well, the train's the whale, but, who's Ahab? Is it, Warden Ranken, or is it, Manny, the prisoner, So, but yeah, John P. Ryan, I mean, definitely, does a good job in the film, playing, a good antagonist. And I like how, other than, say, Sara, or, Rebecca De Mornay as Sara, or, Kenneth McMillan as, the head of the train place, Eddie. I mean, there's really no heroes in this movie. There are really no heroes in this movie, because, the two main characters are criminals, literally. And John P. Ryan, is, a servant of law and order who's abusing his authority. So there you go. But one of the things that stands out about this film is the fact that you have this beautiful score by Trevor Jones, who also did the score for Jim Henson's Labyrinth. But you have this good score that it, on one hand, you could tell it comes from the 80s, but not in a way that makes it dated or cheesy. But it's like there's a very, I guess you could say, symphonic score to it, along with the synthesizers, but it works. I mean, whether it's focusing on the characters or focusing on the train. And in fact, his score, when it comes to how the train's depicted, goes a long way to helping the train almost become a character in and of itself. Because another thing that happens is you have moments where the train starts to look more and more monstrous the more damage it takes, and Trevor Jones's score becomes more ominous as it happens. But you also, when you have the moments where John Voight's character is basically forced to confront the reality of the situation, and just how much of a monster he's been. And you have moments where Trevor Jones's score really kicks in, and sounds like the breaking of one's soul, and it's some powerful stuff. And especially, I don't want to spoil it too much, but especially at the end, I mean, you have this one woman wailing along with the instrumentals, and it's a heartbreaking finale already. But when you have that going in along with it, I mean, it's some powerful stuff. But you also have some wonderful cinematography by a guy named Alan Hume, who worked on a lot of James Bond movies. But it almost feels like you're watching a documentary at times, because of how things are shot. Whether we're talking aerial shots or shots, on the train or in the train, or even within the prison. I mean, it looks like you're watching a documentary unfold at times. There's in say like the indoor environments, like say inside the train cars, or in the prisons. I mean, there's like this gritty, harsh feel to it. But then on the other hand, when it comes to, say, the outdoor scenes, and when you're, seeing things from afar, I mean, it's just breathtaking in its beauty, but also just in its own way terrifying at how desolate everything is. And so, some wonderful, cinematography. But all in all, I mean, you got, some wonderful production values. You got some wonderful performances, and you have some, exceptional, writing. And in fact, speaking of the writing, the film, it was originally, going to be a movie by Akira Kurosawa, based on a screenplay they wrote a long time ago, but that movie never came to be. So it was rewritten, by Djordje, Milicevic. I hope I'm saying his name right. Paul Zindel and Edward Bunker. So, three of them ended up, coming up with the script that this was made to be, but it came from Akira Kurosawa's script. So, even if you haven't seen much in the way of Akira Kurosawa films, have you seen any of his stuff, you can kind of get a feel that this, even though this isn't his movie, it came from him. So I thought that was pretty cool to find out, because like, yeah, I could definitely see that now. But all in all, though, I mean, I think that Runaway Train, was just a great movie. There's some, good action scenes when it comes to like the train going out of control and the characters trying to stop it. But you also have some fantastic character development and character studies, when it's focusing on, Manny, as played by Jon Voight, and Buck as Eric Roberts, and Sara as Rebecca De Mornay, and even John P. Ryan as Warden Ranken. I mean, some good character development and good character studies, and and a haunting score by Trevor Jones. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Runaway Train 5 out of 5 stars. This was a great movie. As far as bonus features go, you have a wonderful commentary track by co-star Eric Roberts and film historians David Del Valle and C. Courtney Joyner. And so, listening to that particular commentary track was a treat, because, I mean, I already knew some of the stuff from, looking up stuff online, like, say, on IMDb or something like that, but there's a lot of, there's a lot more that you find out about the movie from, talking, from when they're talking with Eric Roberts. And, I'm glad to know that this is a film that he regards as a high mark for him, because he was great in this movie. Because sometimes you hear like an actor talk about something, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, I don't know why people like it, it's stupid. But it's like, no, I mean, he's proud of the movie, and he's glad that people still like it. And I'm glad to know that he and Jon Voight actually got along, because even though they have this antagonistic relationship in the movie, they got along really well behind the scenes. And so that was nice to know. And you hear a little bit more about Rebecca De Mornay initially being too pretty for the part, and how the director kind of chewed her out, and so she had to go be watered down, so to speak, or muddied down, or what you want to call it, to make it her look more normal. But one of the things that, you find out is that this helicopter pilot, a guy by the name of Rick Hawley, was killed in an accident when he was helping to film a scene. And his helicopter got caught in a power line, and so the movie's dedicated to his memory. But when they're talking about him on the commentary track, you could tell things kind of get serious, and so. But you see like a lot of the stunt work in the movie, and you listen to it, and both the two historians and Eric Roberts are all like, man, I mean, this is some great stuff, because they're talking about how dangerous this stuff was, but how breathtaking the results are, versus, say, if the stunt work had been green screen. Because they're pointing out that, while Eric Roberts and Jon Voight and Rebecca De Mornay, I mean, yeah, they were obviously on the train at some points. When it came to, say, like the dangerous stunts and what have you, they're like, okay, those were definitely stunt doubles. Or they're talking about like when, where it was filmed in one scene and where it was filmed in another, but how the editing made it look like it was all in one place. And so, but yeah, all in all, a great commentary track. And you also have Trailers from Hell with Rod Laurie, who I'm not sure who he is. I think he was a director or something, but Basically, it's him talking over a trailer for Runaway Train, offering some trivia and historical tidbits and what have you. So I mean, it's nice. It's like a trailer with some you know trivia, that kind of thing. But you also have several theatrical trailers, not just for this movie, but for other movies as well. So I would have liked it if they could have talked to Konchalovsky, because I believe this was his American debut. But also, if they could have talked to John Voight or Rebecca De Mornay, since this was kind of like a highlight for them as well. I mean, it would have been nice if they'd been able to, if not include in the commentary track, at least have a little retrospective documentary to where they all sat down and talked about things about the movie. Because for Andrei Konchalovsky, I mean, he did a great job as far as directing goes, and I wish that there had been more films like this they made, because I think he only did a couple more movies for America before going back to Russia, because he was a Russian immigrant or emigre, how you say that word, but he came from Russia, but he kind of went back to Russia after a certain point. But the stuff he did for American cinema was actually pretty cool, and this was definitely a great movie they made. But yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention is that one of the things you find out both on IMDb and in the commentary is that this was Danny Trejo's Danny Trejo's debut, and was in this movie where he plays a prisoner who's boxing with Eric Roberts' character, and you find out that he was actually in the movie because one of the screenwriters, Edward Bunker, recognized him because the two of them had served in prison together at one point and become friends. And so when Edward Bunker saw Danny Trejo on the set one day, he's like, "Hey, I think we might have a part for you here," and talked to Andrei Konchalovsky about it. And sure enough, Danny Trejo ended up, not only helping Eric Roberts, with the boxing scenes and training him, but he actually played the guy that he was boxing against. And so there's some funny parts in the commentary where Eric Roberts saying, "And there I am knocking out Danny Trejo, and just for a record, that would not happen in real life. It'd be the other way around, believe me." So you find some funny stuff like that. So, but yeah, Danny Trejo, I mean, guys start here. So there you go. But yeah, that was Runaway Train. 5 out of 5 stars. This was a great movie, and of the movies I've seen from the Cannon Group, this is definitely the one. While there have been some good movies that came out of the Cannon Group here and there, this is the one movie that came out of them that was actually great. So anyway, yeah, thanks for coming along on this ride, and if you made it this far, thank you very much. And you got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. If you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care, have a good day, bye.